My dears, before I share this difficult story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your words in the comments let me know these stories are truly touching your hearts. And now, take a deep breath with me. What I'm about to tell you is not easy. It's a story of hope, silence, and a journey to freedom that took me 3 decades to find. I was only 19 when I took my final vows. The convent walls felt protective then, like arms holding me tightly. But I didn't know they would hold me prisoner too. I wasn't born into faith. I ran to it. My home had been chaos, a drunk father, a mother who worked herself to the bone, and siblings who fled as soon as they could. I wanted peace. I wanted purpose. I thought I would find it in God's house. The first sight of the convent struck me with awe and dread. Tall stone walls, ivy crawling like veins over old bricks, heavy oak doors that creaked with a sound more like a groan than a welcome. It smelled faintly of incense and something sour underneath. Mold, perhaps, or old secrets. Sister Margaret greeted me with a thin smile. "You'll learn obedience here, child. Obedience and silence." At first, I believed her. The days were long but structured. Prayer at dawn, work in the gardens, silence at meals. I clung to routine like a drowning woman to driftwood. But by the 3rd week, I began noticing things that didn't fit the holy image I had painted in my mind. There were locked doors we were never allowed to open. Whispered arguments late at night in the superior's chambers. Novices who arrived full of light, only to grow pale and hollow-eyed within months. One evening, as I walked past the infirmary, I heard a scream, high-pitched, full of terror. It stopped as suddenly as it began. When I asked Sister Agnes about it, she simply said, "It's not your place to ask, Mary." The food was sparse and often spoiled. Some nights, my stomach cramped so badly I could barely kneel for evening prayers. Yet complaints were met with penance, kneeling in the cold chapel for hours or scrubbing floors until our hands bled. But the worst was confession. We lined up every Friday, filing into a dimly lit chamber where Father Thomas sat, his shadow looming large against the candlelight. "Speak, child," he'd say, voice low, eyes too sharp. "Confess your sins, even the ones you haven't realized yet." And if your confession wasn't enough, he'd keep you kneeling there for hours, forcing you to recount every thought, every doubt. Some sisters never came out. Not the same, anyway. I began to wonder, had I escaped one prison only to enter another? One night, I heard faint crying in the hallway. I opened my door a crack and saw Sister Beatrice being dragged down the corridor by 2 older nuns. Her nightgown was torn, and her face pale with fear. The next morning, her cot was empty. "She's been sent to a retreat for disobedience," Sister Margaret said, avoiding my gaze. The word retreat chilled me. It had become a euphemism for something far darker. Weeks later, whispers started about a room in the basement, the reflection room. I was told to never ask about it. But one day I saw Sister Agnes returning from there, her hands raw and bleeding, eyes vacant. My curiosity became a gnawing hunger. I waited until a stormy night, when thunder drowned out my footsteps, and I crept into the forbidden wing. The door to the basement was unlocked. The stairs groaned under my weight. The air grew colder with each step, carrying the metallic scent of blood and something sourer. At the bottom, candlelight flickered against stone walls. Chains hung from hooks. A whip lay coiled on a wooden table. And there, in the corner, Sister Helena knelt in a pool of her own blood, whispering prayers through cracked lips. Her eyes met mine. "Run," she mouthed. But before I could move, a hand seized my shoulder. Father Thomas. Father Thomas's grip tightened like a vice on my arm, dragging me away from the horror before I could even scream. The basement door slammed shut behind us, sealing Sister Helena's fate and my own. "You shouldn't have come here," he hissed, his voice calm but edged with something darker. Curiosity is the devil's whisper. I was forced down the corridor, my bare feet scraping against cold stone. Every torch we passed threw long shadows on the walls, and in those flickering shapes, I thought I saw the faces of other sisters, hollow-eyed and pleading. He pushed me into a small chamber lit by a single candle. The walls were lined with thick leather straps and wooden paddles, relics of penance past. In the center stood a low wooden bench. "On your knees," he commanded. I obeyed, trembling. "Confess everything, every thought of doubt, every disobedience." I began to speak, words tumbling from my lips, real sins, imagined sins, anything to make it stop. But it didn't stop. Each pause brought the crack of leather against the bench beside me, a warning of what would come if I faltered. By the time he was done, my voice was hoarse, my knees raw, and my soul heavier than ever. "You will not speak of this," he said finally, his face close enough I could smell the sourness of his breath. "You will pray. You will serve. And you will remember, obedience saves, disobedience damns." As he left, the candle flickered violently, and for a brief moment, I swore I heard Helena's whisper from below, "Do not let them break you." I crawled back to my cot that night, every muscle screaming in pain. But worse than the pain was the new knowledge burning in my mind. This was not a house of God. It was a prison of fear. And I knew then, I had to find a way out. I lay awake that night, my body aching from Father Thomas's punishment. Every breath felt like fire in my lungs, but I refused to let the tears fall. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft rustle of habits and the distant sobs of other sisters, and something inside me shifted. They wanted to break me, to bend me into silent submission like all the others. But I was not ready to be another ghost wandering these halls. Helena's eyes, bloodshot and desperate, haunted me. Her whispered "run" became a steady drumbeat in my head. The next day, I went about my chores as usual. Kneading bread in the cold kitchen, sweeping the damp stone floors, praying in the chapel. But in my mind, I was planning. I started small. I began memorizing the convent's layout, every hallway, every locked door, every creaky floorboard. I watched the schedules of the nuns, noting when the guards in habits took their shifts, when Father Thomas retired to his quarters. At night, I pressed my ear against the wooden walls, eavesdropping on whispered conversations. One evening, as I polished the brass candlesticks in the chapel, I overheard Sister Agnes and Mother Superior speaking in hushed tones. "She knows too much," Agnes said. "If she speaks." "She won't," Mother Superior interrupted. "Fear keeps them all silent." But fear was no longer enough. The next week, during gardening duty, I smuggled a small shard of broken glass into my sleeve. It wasn't much, but it was something. I hid it beneath my mattress, alongside scraps of paper where I scribbled my thoughts, memories of the outside world, fragments of who I once was. One rainy night, I crept back to the basement. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might wake the others. The reflection room was locked this time, but I pressed my ear to the door. Inside, muffled sobs and the crack of leather echoed. Helena's voice cried out in prayer, broken and weak. "I will not let this be your grave," I whispered. 2 nights later, I found my first ally. Sister Ruth, a quiet woman with kind eyes, caught me sneaking back from the kitchens. Instead of scolding me, she grabbed my arm. "Mary," she whispered, "I know what you're doing. I've thought of it too." We spoke in secret after lights out, huddled under our thin blankets. She told me of others who had tried to escape. Few made it. Most were caught and sent to the reflection room. "They want us to believe there's no hope," Ruth said. "But if we act together." Hope. It was a dangerous thing in a place like this. But it was also the only thing that could save us. Over the next weeks, we gathered a small circle of trusted sisters. Ruth, Margaret, Elise. Women who still remembered laughter, who still dreamed of life beyond stone walls. We shared secrets, warnings, and plans. Slowly, the embers of defiance began to glow. But with every step forward, the danger grew. One mistake could mean the end. And one night, the danger came knocking. Father Thomas discovered one of our notes hidden behind a loose brick. The next morning, Elise was gone. They found her plotting against God, Mother Superior announced at breakfast, her voice calm and cold. Pray for her soul. I gripped my spoon so tightly my knuckles turned white. No more. I could not let Elise's suffering be in vain. I whispered to Ruth that night, my voice steady despite my racing heart. We act now, or we die here. And for the first time since I entered the convent, I felt alive. The night air was thick with fear and the faint scent of incense. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as Ruth, Margaret, and I huddled in the corner of the laundry room. Our small circle had shrunk after Elise's disappearance, but our resolve had hardened. We have to move tonight, Ruth whispered. If they suspect more of us, we won't get another chance. I nodded. The reflection room haunted my dreams now. I couldn't let any more sisters be dragged there. Margaret's eyes darted toward the door. The northern gate, she murmured. Father Thomas won't patrol there until dawn. That's our window. But before we could speak another word, we heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. A shadow passed under the doorframe. I held my breath. The handle rattled. Who's in there? A deep voice growled. Ruth grabbed my arm. We can't be caught. Not now. There was no time to think. I grabbed a metal pail and slammed it against the back door, sending it swinging open with a crash. We bolted into the cold night, habits flying behind us. The convent's courtyard was eerily silent except for the sound of our bare feet slapping against cobblestones. Behind us, shouts erupted. They're escaping. Stop them. Sister Margaret stumbled but kept running. Ruth led us toward the shadowy northern gate, where the heavy iron lock glinted in the moonlight. Quick! The key! I hissed. Margaret fumbled in her sleeve and pulled out the stolen key. But as she thrust it into the lock, a voice rang out behind us. Drop it! Father Thomas stood there, flanked by two of the older nuns. His face was a mask of rage, the flickering torchlight making his features look almost demonic. You think you can defy God's will? He snarled. You think you can leave? Ruth stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. This isn't God's will. This is yours. With a cry of fury, Father Thomas lunged. What followed was chaos. Ruth grabbed the torch from his hand and swung it wildly, flames catching on the dry ivy clinging to the walls. Screams echoed as fire began to spread. Go, Mary! Open it! Ruth shouted. I twisted the key with shaking hands, hearing the satisfying click of freedom. Margaret and I shoved the gates open as thick smoke billowed around us. Ruth turned back to face Father Thomas as he advanced. Not this time, she whispered, then disappeared into the flames with him. I wanted to scream her name, but Margaret pulled me through the gate. We can't stop. She bought us this chance. We ran. Into the woods. Into the unknown. Behind us, the convent burned like a beacon in the darkness. And though my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, I knew one thing. We were free. But freedom was only the beginning. The forest embraced us with darkness and biting cold. Margaret and I stumbled over roots and rocks, our lungs raw, our feet bleeding from running barefoot across the unforgiving ground. Behind us, the glow of the burning convent flickered through the trees, its embers rising into the night sky like tortured souls escaping their prison. We didn't speak for hours. Every sound, an owl's hoot, the snapping of a branch, felt like footsteps chasing us. When we finally collapsed beneath a gnarled oak, the silence between us was heavy. They'll come after us, Margaret said, her voice hoarse. "They won't let us go so easily." I nodded. "We can't stay in one place. Not until we're far enough they can't find us." Our habits were torn, singed from the fire. We buried them beneath leaves and fashioned crude cloaks from branches and moss to blend with the forest. It wasn't much, but it was enough to disguise us if anyone searched nearby. The days blurred together. We scavenged for berries and drank from muddy streams. Hunger gnawed at us, but worse was the fear. Twice we saw distant figures moving through the woods, nuns in habits, their faces obscured by hoods. We hid beneath brambles, holding our breath as they passed. At night, the nightmares came. Flames devouring the convent. Ruth's final cry. Father Thomas's twisted face emerging from the smoke. "Do you think they survived?" Margaret whispered one night as we huddled for warmth. I stared at the stars, my eyes stinging. Part of me hopes they didn't, but part of me knows monsters like him don't die so easily. On the fourth day, we reached a small village. We watched from the tree-line as children played and women hung laundry. It felt unreal, life going on as if our hell had never existed. "We could ask for help," Margaret suggested. I shook my head. "If they find out where we are, they'll come. They'll claim we're mad or sinful. And they'll drag us back." So we moved on. But escape had left its mark. At night, I heard whispers in the wind, faint echoes of prayers and screams. Sometimes I swore I saw Helena's face in the shadows, her lips forming the word, "Run." We were free, but we were not yet safe. And in my heart, I knew this was not the end. The convent's reach was long, and its secrets were not meant to leave those stone walls alive. We kept moving. Days turned into weeks as we crept along forest paths and back roads, avoiding villages and travelers alike. Hunger became a constant companion. Our ribs showed through our skin, our hands trembled from exhaustion. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, we stumbled across a small farmhouse. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the scent of baking bread made my stomach clench painfully. "We can't risk it," I whispered. But Margaret shook her head. "We'll die out here. If we don't eat, we'll never make it further." I wanted to argue, but my legs gave way, and I collapsed to my knees in the dirt. Margaret wrapped an arm around me. "Just one night," she said. "We'll move on at first light." The farmer was an older woman named Lydia, with kind eyes and a wariness in her expression. She let us in without asking too many questions, feeding us warm broth and letting us sleep in her barn. "I've seen women like you before," Lydia said softly as she handed me a rough wool blanket. "Eyes full of secrets. Whatever you're running from, it must be terrible." I wanted to tell her everything, the chains, the blood, the reflection room, but fear sealed my lips. "Thank you," I managed. "We'll be gone by morning." But Lydia shook her head. "You're not the first. You won't be the last. The convent, it has reached far beyond those walls." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" She glanced at the window, as if expecting someone. "They have friends in every village. Priests, merchants, even constables. They say they're protecting the faithful. But really, they're protecting their secrets." I felt the air leave my lungs. We hadn't escaped. We'd only traded stone walls for invisible chains. At dawn, we prepared to leave, but Lydia pressed a bundle of food into our hands. "Go north," she urged. "There's a safe house in the mountains. Look for a red door." We thanked her and slipped away, but her warning echoed in my mind. Friends in every village. Watching. Waiting. 2 days later, our fears became reality. As we crossed a narrow path, 3 figures blocked our way, nuns in habits, their faces hidden. "Mary! Margaret!" Father Thomas's voice. My heart froze. He was alive. And he had found us. "You've caused enough trouble," he said, stepping forward. "But it's not too late. Return with us. Repent. You can still be saved." Margaret gripped my hand. "We're never going back." Father Thomas's expression hardened. "Then you leave me no choice." His companions stepped forward, chains glinting in their hands. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Father Thomas advanced, his boots crunching on dead leaves. The two hooded figures flanked him, their chains dragging against the ground with a metallic hiss. Margaret gripped my arm tightly. I could feel her pulse racing, mirroring my own. We had run too far, suffered too much to be dragged back into hell. "You've caused enough trouble," Father Thomas repeated, his voice cold as the steel links in his hands. "Come quietly, and perhaps the Mother Superior will show mercy." Mercy! I spat the word. "Like the mercy you showed Helena? Or Ruth?" His eyes narrowed. "Those were necessary sacrifices to preserve the sanctity of the order." Margaret stepped forward. "We're not going back. Not alive." Father Thomas's expression darkened. He signaled to the two nuns. "Take them." The women lunged forward, chains swinging. Margaret shoved me aside just as a loop of iron flew past my head. I stumbled, crashing against a tree. "Run, Mary!" she shouted, grappling with one of the attackers. But I couldn't leave her. Not again. With a primal scream, I grabbed a thick branch and swung it wildly. The second nun reeled as the branch connected with her hood, revealing hollow, haunted eyes. "We don't want to hurt you," I pleaded. But she raised her chain again. Before she could strike, a sharp crack echoed through the forest. The nun fell forward, an arrow lodged in her back. From the shadows, a figure emerged, cloaked and armed with a bow. A man. His face was hard, weathered, but his eyes burned with purpose. "Get up," he barked. "This way." Margaret and I scrambled to our feet. Father Thomas bellowed in rage as we followed the stranger into the trees. "Who are you?" I gasped. "A friend," he said curtly. "And your only chance at surviving what's coming." Behind us, the forest was alive with shouts and the sound of pursuit. "Why are you helping us?" Margaret panted. The man glanced back, his face grim. "Because I know what they've done. And it's time someone burned their empire to the ground." We ran until our lungs burned, until the shouts behind us became whispers swallowed by the forest. The man led us to a small cabin nestled in a clearing, almost invisible under the cover of pines. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and herbs. Weapons lined the walls, bows, knives, and an old musket. He motioned for us to sit. "My name is Samuel," he said. "I was once like you. I believed in their lies. Until they destroyed everything I loved." He told us of his sister, taken by the convent under the guise of penance and never seen again. Of others from nearby villages who disappeared, their families silenced with threats or coin. "They are more than a convent," Samuel said. "They are a network. They deal in power, secrets, and blood." Margaret shivered. "How can we stop them? We're just two women." "You're not just anything," Samuel replied. "You survived. That's more than most." We spent days planning. Samuel taught us how to move unseen, how to fight if cornered. At night, I dreamed of flames and chains, of Helena's broken body and Ruth's sacrifice. The nightmares hardened into resolve. One cold morning, Samuel laid a map on the table. "Their strength lies in fear. Take that away, and they crumble." We would expose them. The abuses, the disappearances. Samuel had contacts, priests and merchants who had turned against the convent in secret. But first, we had to return to the place where it all began. The ruins of the convent loomed in the distance, its once proud walls blackened by fire but still standing. It felt like walking into the belly of a beast. Samuel led the way, bow ready. Margaret and I moved silently at his side. Inside we found records, ledgers detailing payments for silence, lists of girls sent to reflection, and letters from officials complicit in the crimes. "Take them all," Samuel urged. "The world needs to see." But as we gathered the evidence, a familiar voice echoed through the halls. "You really thought you could kill me?" Father Thomas stepped from the shadows, his face scarred from the fire but alive with fury. He raised a pistol. Margaret cried out. The shot rang. But it wasn't Margaret who fell. Samuel had taken the bullet. With a roar, I lunged at Thomas, tackling him to the ground. We struggled among the ashes until I seized a shard of broken glass and drove it into his chest. His eyes went wide, then glassy. The monster was finally dead. We carried Samuel's body from the convent and buried him under an ancient oak. His sacrifice became our vow. Margaret and I delivered the documents to Samuel's contacts. Within weeks, the convent's crimes exploded across the region. Arrests were made. Survivors came forward. The order's empire crumbled. Years later, I still wake in the night, the scent of incense and blood lingering in my dreams. But now, there is peace too. Margaret and I opened a refuge for women, those fleeing the same darkness we once endured. We named it Helena's House. We are no longer nuns, no longer victims. We are survivors. And we have vowed, never again. The convent burned, but from its ashes grew a garden of hope.